They were posting some crazy shit like months ago. Remember that?
What the fuck do you have on your face, Olivia?
Remember, they lost the Afghan war 10 years ago.
You brought a freaking guillotine.
I remember thinking, man, governments are not going to like this shit.
Somebody telling them to stand up for their rights is disinformation. As I said, democracy is a system that reinforces authoritarian ideals. Kind of words to the way.
Oh no! Oh no. Okay, no.
I'm fucking livid that we are stuck in the timeline where Alex Jones is right. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, shitposters, activists, and people of the internet, thank you for tuning in to another episode of O'Donnell for Liberty. I am your host, Justin. Before we get started, make sure to hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications to keep up with future content. And if you enjoy the program, you can be an early supporter by heading over to the Patreon link in the description. And if you want to keep in touch between shows, follow me on social media like Twitter and Facebook, or join our community Discord channel. All those links are also in the description. Tonight, we're going to be talking about living libertarian, opting out of the state, and how you can help others get around the tyranny in their lives. We're going to take questions, so make sure you hit the like button, leave some comments, tell us what you think in the chat, and give a warm welcome to tonight's guest, former candidate for the Libertarian Presidential Nomination and activist extraordinaire, Daniel Taxation is Theft Behrman. Dan, how's it going? Thanks for joining tonight.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together, man. Good to see you again. It's been a while.
I know. You got to come back to New Hampshire sometime.
Oh,
Didn't
yeah. That night at that place that we're not going to speak about, that was fucking, I do want to go back just for that. Oh,
well,
man.
I mean, we can speak about that place now because it's going public. We're turning it into a national fraternal order, and we're going to start opening up lodges all over the country.
Nice.
Because
like
we finally figured out that if we had
that.
Yeah, well, we finally got enough support. We got a GoFundMe going to get things off the ground, and we're at about $200,000 raised so far. But once we get it off the ground, and once we get enough members in a few different states, we can do things like, I don't know, offer health insurance to our members who are self-employed.
Nice.
So, Dan,
that's fucking awesome. I love it.
So I know you. I've been aware of you for a long time.
I'll supply the drugs. I got some insulin and healers.
Yeah. I followed your work for a long time. I've been a huge fan of your work for a long time. The people familiar with LP Inside Baseball probably have, but for otherwise, and just for like general crypto viewers and people who watch outside of the Libertarian Party, what's your story? Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do?
Oh man, I'm just a guy. Trying to live my life. So yeah, I don't know. I never know how to answer that question. I grew up in California, but I'm not a commie. I'm a software engineer by trade. I've worked in the film and video industry for a while when I was a little bit younger. That was kind of really where my passion was. And then I stumbled on I kind of got involved in politics because the government started fucking with me. And then it was like, oh, this whole system is really screwed up. And then I kind of stumbled on the Libertarian Party, and I was like, oh, these guys are trying to fix it. And then I was kind of like, oh, these guys aren't doing that great of a job. let me kind of go my own way and see what I can do to help make the world a little bit free. I don't want to knock on the LP too much because it's a bunch of different people pulling it in different directions, but I think there's some really awesome people in there doing some really awesome things too. So.
And I think we can all realize like the LP doesn't do the greatest job, but like there's no other organization really doing a job.
Right. But this is the thing too, like as libertarians, we're always talking about how central planning sucks and we shouldn't rely on the government to do everything. But then we rely on the LP to do what we know the government can't do, instead of just saying, hey, right, let's all split up, do whatever we think is best, and let the market decide, and whatever works is going to work. And then other people will see our success and they'll come along and help us. And the LP should basically just put all the different stuff in front of people and say, hey, this is all the stuff going on, go support it. Instead of saying let's elect the perfect LNC who's going to be the perfect steward of all the money that we donate to it. And they're going to do exactly what we want it to do. Cause that's exactly what we say doesn't work with the government.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen it at least come to height and come to the real forefront of visibility within libertarian politics and the liberty movement in general. Just kind of people feeling down on the LP with how the LNC and the National Committee has been treating COVID. and how long it's taken them to have any stance on like the biggest infringement on liberty in our lifetimes. Yeah. And it took them so long to have anything to say.
Yeah, it was. I mean, like I remember when this thing first started popping up, it was like LP Texas, LP National, like they were just really. And I mean, I get it because at that point, like nobody really knew what it was. Nobody really knew. I mean, there were some people saying, "Oh, it's a scam. The virus doesn't exist," and then some people were like, "Oh, I don't know. This could be really bad." And we didn't really know because we're all getting like all this bullshit information from the government who's not giving us a straight story. So I get it. Some people were kind of afraid, but they kind of like leaned to the side of let's be overly cautious, and we're not giving up our freedoms. We're just not exercising them right now. Because Cat wants to join.
She always wants to join. The cat is an attention whore. She came out of her shell when I brought her to Porkfest. Everyone thought I was crazy. Like, you're gonna bring your kitten to Porkfest? I'm like, yeah. Everyone loved her at Porkfest. Nice. So now she can't get enough of the camera and can't get enough of being in front of people.
Celebrity.
No, but to that point, like, the whole we don't want to give up our freedoms, we're just not exercising them. But for the longest time, it's been the whole argument of Second Amendment activists who advocate for open carry and even concealed carry, and the protests that they do hold against gun infringements is like, if you don't exercise your rights, you lose them. You've given them up. Right.
Exactly. And here's a perfect example too, because like I remember, people were legit scared. And like there was like when this was all going down, everybody's just kind of like hiding in their homes, stay home, save lives. And there was and I was like telling people like, this isn't right. Let's at least go. Let's do a protest, right? Let's go to we'll pick a day. We'll all go to our city halls and we'll protest. And everyone's like, oh, but we're going to be outside and we're going to get sick. And I'm like, stay in your car, make it a drive-by protest. Like, this is like literally the plan I'm proposing. And all these libertarians are like, oh, you're crazy. And they're telling me how like, the virus can get in through your air filter and like get into your car. And like, this is like the shit they're coming up with. And like, everyone's like, no, it's a terrible idea. And then like a couple weeks later, you see all the Trumpsters are out there and they actually did that. They went out and they had a protest. And of course they weren't staying. Well, a lot of them were staying in their cars. And like, but it's like, and I'm like, look, this could have been our thing. Like, this was all over the news. That could have been our thing as libertarians. And everybody's like, oh, but all the Trumpsters would have shown up and it's really bad. All those people are bad. Like all these like excuses coming out of libertarians as to why that shouldn't have been us, why we shouldn't have gone out there. There was this was the one where they said like there were so many cars that there were ambulances trying to get into the hospital, which turned out to be a total fucking lie. The ambulances couldn't get into the hospital because the cars were blocking traffic. You remember this?
It's the same thing going on right now with ivermectin patients taking up beds that and gunshot victims are going untreated.
Exactly. Total bullshit. And I'm like, and like before we knew that was bullshit, like I was sitting there like, guys, if the libertarians were out there, we could have been the ones directing traffic to make sure that the ambulances can get into the hospital instead of like just all these crazy Trumpsters out. And we could have been like out there getting our own footage and doing our own thing. And like the pushback was just like, no, that's a terrible idea. We want to cower in our closets and not go outside and stay home, stay safe. And I'm like,
I remember, like, I was trying to run the petition drive in New Hampshire. I was trying to, like, every single day get petitions to get libertarians on the ballot, to get Joe Jorgensen on the ballot, to get myself on the ballot, Darryl Perry on the ballot, and other candidates that were trying to provide an alternative to the two-party system here in New Hampshire. And it was the hardest petition drive we've ever done because people were afraid to talk to you. People wouldn't like trying to engage people outside of a supermarket. They're all standoffish and nobody would come within 6 feet of you. And I remember when I was in court, when we sued the state over the regulations, I said to the judge, like when I was being cross-examined, I'm like, it's not so much the regulations that have made this hard. It's been the fear-mongering and the propaganda from the state that have made people afraid to engage with their fellow human beings. And but the few of us who weren't, the few people who didn't want to go, like they had anti-lockdown protests on an incredibly regular basis here in New Hampshire. An organization called Reopen New Hampshire sprang out of nowhere, and it was a nonpartisan organization. There was a lot of Trumpers involved, but there was a lot of libertarians involved. Most Free Staters were involved. A lot of Democrats who were against the lockdowns were involved. And they held regular mass gathering protests outside the State House, outside the governor's home. on the seacoast, demanding that the lockdowns be ended and the state be opened up. And a lot of people, when it came to doing things outside, didn't want to wear masks because whatever their reason they didn't want to wear a mask, that's their personal goddamn choice. In my opinion, they shouldn't have to wear a mask. For me, it's issues I have with breathing restriction due to time in the military and things that have not so great with my body since then. And for others, it was PTSD about restraints, or just simply because they didn't want to. That was a perfectly sufficient reason, in my opinion. I remember going to a protest with Joe Jorgensen in Manchester, New Hampshire, and a picture went viral of everyone standing around at this protest. It was a candlelight vigil for Black Lives Matter, and the only two people not wearing masks were myself and Joe Jorgensen. And libertarians tried to cancel us.
Yeah.
It was people like the Sarwark crowd, the Leslie Ann Petersons, the outright libertarians, like the woke left of the Libertarian Party, demanding that like we have to apologize and go back, and that we were a disgrace to the party for not wearing masks.
Yeah, it is really difficult. We're dealing with, like I say this all the time. Ultimately, like, we're emotional creatures. Like as much as like we can sit down and have an intellectual conversation, and like we're a small crowd amongst the general population, but even then it's like among us, we still have our own triggers and our own fears. And like, as much as we can have a philosophical conversation, when the government says something that really scares us, and when everybody's believing it, like it can still get to us, it can still affect us. So like I get it, but at the same time, it's like you kind of have to like, you kind of have to face your fears and at some point and decide like, okay, look, I get it. Maybe there's a legit fear out there, but sometimes we have to just look that fear in the face and say like, we're not going to let this happen. We're not going to let, we're not going to let this tragedy become the excuse for you to take all our rights away. Or excuse me, they can't take our rights away. They can trample them.
As I used to tell David Hogg before he blocked me on Twitter, being a victim of a tragedy doesn't make you an expert in public policy. And I think that extends further, like being exposed to tragic circumstances doesn't make you an expert in like the policy on how others should live their lives. And I think that is what we're seeing, is people are so afraid of the unknown, and the government has not helped, because the government has been the source of most of the propaganda, instigating the fear and instigating uncertainty about the unknown, that people have just been willing to roll over and sacrifice their principles for the sake of their own safety. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's difficult too, because like, even, I mean, like at some point you have like, I don't know, you have miscommunication, you have like things like people always escalating things, rumors spreading. And it's like you can almost look at this thing and it's totally plausible that like someone like, someone was just like, oh, there's a new virus. And then they're like, let's be careful about this. And then like the story leaks, and then like, somebody else is like, oh, I heard. And then like it escalates and escalates. And the next thing you know, you have all these people who are paranoid. And then it doesn't even necessarily need to be like, one guy, hanging out at the Illuminati palace saying like, hey, we're going to make everybody afraid of this, and we're going to start this big propaganda campaign. It's very possible for that kind of stuff to happen organically too, which is scary. But it's like that all happens like from our fears. I mean, it's like the stock market, right? Like some whale comes in and sells his stock, and like, something goes down a couple points, and everybody starts panic selling, right? Now the whole fucking market is crashing, and it's like nothing actually happened. Just like people got afraid because there was a small little ripple in the water, and they made the wave bigger. And it's like, it's kind of like the more connected we are to like all this crap that's going on, the more that affects us. Like, they say like, why aren't the Amish afraid of COVID? Because they don't have TVs. Like, right. I mean, like, so, and then especially like social media, right? It's like, oh my God, all of our friends, right? Because that's one of the most powerful influencers, right? Is there's a word for it. Social, I don't know. It's like when everybody around you is like doing something, it's like you must kind of be like, you have this herd mentality that you have to conform to what everybody else is doing. And like they use this in advertising and marketing, right? They like, oh, everybody's doing it, therefore you should buy our product, right? Everybody loves this. 9 out of 10 doctors say, You know, like everybody's doing it. Oh, I have to do it. So when you see like, you know, some shit comes out on the news and then all of your friends are reposting it on social media, it's like, oh shit, all my friends believe this. It must be true. It kind of like adds into like support this. And like, you know, I get it. Like some of us are just kind of like, yeah, I don't believe any shit that comes out of the mainstream media until like it's actually like proven and verified somewhere else, because most of the stuff they say is just complete crap. But until you reach that point, it's like, yeah, I know politicians lie to us, and I know the news is fake to some degree, but I mean, there's a virus. You can't deny that there's a virus, right? And it's like you have like these little building blocks that you can't deny, and it's like everything kind of escalates on top of that, and just like reinforces this like mesh of like a fear network that like keeps everybody panicking and like escalating things. It's crazy.
Well, a friend of mine pointed out today, actually on Facebook, weird enough place to see it. And I saw her post where she pointed out, like, up until now, like if I'd believed the media, I would have thought the anti-vax movement, people who are against mandatory vaccinations, was just like 10 to 15% of the country, and it was just like a fringe movement. But then Biden went on TV yesterday and admitted that it's 47% of the country that's unvaccinated. So like this really is a case of like a very large minority. It is a minority versus majority thing, and the government is using propaganda. They are using fear. They are using media. They are using social media. You mentioned how the Amish aren't afraid because they're not exposed to the media. When I was on the Tower Gang show the other night, I had gone on a rant, and somebody's like, so what do you feel about the Amish? I'm like, they're privileged fucks. The Amish are privileged fucks because they're not bombarded by propaganda 24/7. And unfortunately, we can opt out all we want. Like, if you want to leave Facebook and go to another platform, there's still propaganda on that platform. It's just of a different flavor. The people who are truly disconnected, the agorists and the communes, they're the only ones who are safe from it.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because I'm noticing a lot of this in Mexico. Like, you know, like, okay, you go to a CVS in the US, right? What do they have? They have TVs with like fucking like the shit going on in the corner, right? You go to like any airport and they have the news on, and it's CNN, and it's like all the fear mongering. Yep. It's like even the airports in Mexico, like they don't have that shit. Like if they do, it's like, you know, it's the local news. It's like the weather and like, you know, the police busted some drug dealer, like, you know, some local shit.
The things that matter.
Yeah, but they don't have like this. They don't have the whole like national news network. Stay home, save lives. You know, the virus is everywhere. Don't leave your house. And I think that's really interesting, because like you can see how that really does affect the mentality of people in a society, as like, you know, this is like, you know, we are water, and they are injecting just like, you know, some sort of like chemical into the water through media. Like this is how it works. It's just sound waves. It's just light beams coming out of the TV, but it goes into our minds, and it's in the form of ideas, and it actually does shape our brains. And people say, oh, there's no such thing as mind control and like X-rays in the sky and everything. Yeah, no, it's not X-rays in the sky or anything like that. It's the messages that you hear over and over and over again. It is literally programming. This is the mind control. It's not science fiction. It's, you know, it's like training your dog, except at a much higher, much more complicated level. That's what they're doing to us with these messages. They're training us to respond certain ways. They're training us to obey everything that they say. You know, this is what they're doing. And they start at like such a young age, because what do you have? Like you have this public education system where it's centralized. The like one office in Washington, D.C. gets to dictate what every kid in America is going to learn from the time they're 1 year old to like whenever they graduate, and beyond. They're controlling all of that. They're making us pledge allegiance to the flag. They're telling us America is the greatest military force and we keep peace around the world, and like all this like total bullshit. And it's like, yeah, some of the stuff when you learn it's false, it's like holy shit, they lied to me. Like, you know, like they used to tell us in the DARE program, like even if a gun is empty, it could go off, be dangerous. You know, it's dangerous. If you're ever arrested, don't ask for a lawyer because it makes you look guilty. Like crazy. Like what? Like it's absolute nonsense. And like, but sometimes you forget about it, but it's still kind of like in your programming. It's in your training. It's how you respond to certain situations without thinking. and then you don't even know where you learned that because it's like so far back in your memory.
Yeah, I there's a lot of people who like to make comparisons to the world we live in today to like great works of fiction like 1984. Everyone's just like, oh, this is the dystopia. 1984 wasn't an instruction manual. I think 1984 was an instruction manual. I think Brave New World was an instruction manual. I think they've become self-fulfilling prophecies that the people in power and people in state apparatus have, whether or not they're intentionally or consciously doing it, are implementing the policies from these great works of dystopian fiction to control the populace because what was described was effective. And one of the realizations I had, and there was no comic that went around a long ago that really pointed this out to me, but I was arguing with some friends last night, and we were debating about like Huxley versus Orwell, Brave New World versus 1984, which one's more realistic, which one's the future we're going to live in. And I came to like, the point, the argument I made was, well, Orwell in 1984 predicted a future where people would be controlled by fear and propaganda and force and control of the narrative. But Huxley in Brave New World predicted a dystopian future where people would be controlled by just access to all the information on the world, mass media, and given everything they loved and pacified, the bread and circus future. And the scariest part to me is that the world we're in right now, both of those are true.
Right.
Like the government is using fear and propaganda and language control and narrative control, but at the same time feeding people information or misinformation or disinformation and entertainment to keep them pacified or monthly checks to keep them from rising up. And it's a real strange. Like I would love, if I had a time machine, I'd love to get like Huxley and Orwell in the same room together and explain to them that they were both right.
Right. It's interesting too, because what was it? It was the Australians, right? So the Australian media, like the government doesn't like even the mainstream media filming them doing anything unless it's like in their favor, right?
Right.
So the Australian government brought mainstream media into those detention camps that they have, what do they call them? I don't know. Isolation camps, whatever. Quarantine camps, detention camps. And so like, they're like, the news is going around and they're saying like, oh yeah, look how great it is. And like, everybody's got a house and like, they're being treated so well. And, and it's like, what they've done is, so like, they've learned, right? They've learned you could try to hide this, right? Like Guantanamo Bay, they tried to hide it, right? They tried to like pretend like it didn't exist. But like they've learned throughout history that like, oh, no. What you do is you make it public and you just convince everyone it's a good thing. Because then like there's like, oh yeah, did you know Guantanamo exists? And like, for a while, everyone's gonna be like, no, that's bullshit. And then when it finally does come out, it's like, oh my God. And then people are, and then you have Congress and, oh, we need to shut this place down. But if you convince everyone it's a good thing, so now you have literal concentration camps in Australia, and the government's going around saying, look at how amazing this is. This is a great thing. This is good for it's going to help us get healthy. It's going to help us get back to normal, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff. This is the new spin that they're doing.
Did you see the news about the app? The app they're pushing out in South Australia?
Yeah, and it's like, what if you don't have like my phone's so like, one of my phones fucking died. I'm on this burner right now, and it's so fucking slow. Like I can't download the weather app to save my life. Like it's terrible. And it's like, what happens? And I actually, because I used to make this argument in the United States a lot. Like, you need an address to get a job, to pay taxes, to do this and that, to vote. Like homeless people can't vote. Homeless people can't run for office because you have to put in an address of your district, right? Like what? And then I was explaining this to an Australian, and they're like, well, in Australia, it's illegal to be homeless. And I'm like, what?
It is in the United States too. In a lot of jurisdictions, it's a criminalized thing. To be homeless is criminal. Like to not have a legal address.
In your car, that's a crime. Sleep in the park, that's a crime. Yeah, but if you can just disappear out of sight, that's fine. Apparently in Australia, like they will find you and like force you somehow into like some sort of like I don't know, like a halfway house or something, and like they like force you to like yeah, I don't know. It's fucking nuts. I don't know the details on it exactly, but it's just like it's fucking insane. But like, so on that, right? I'm watching this show like because I'm like I know I'm fucking terrible. I'm like binge watching on Netflix. But there's this show called Blacklist, right? And it's one of these shows. It's like this like crime detective kind of thing, and it's like it's pretty good. But like what they're doing is it's the same kind of thing. Like you used to have like the cop shows where like the cops break all the rules, but it's okay because it's to bust this dirty drug dealer and like it's necessary. And what they're doing is they're conditioning you to think it's okay to violate the Constitution because these are good guys and ultimately they're doing it for good things. And so this show Blacklist is like there's the FBI working out of a black site. And they're basically like, connecting with the CIA and the NSA, and they're tapping all these phone lines, and they're doing all this like illegal shit that they're supposed to do, but they're catching really bad criminals. And so like the moral of this, and they even went to a court, and like they had this like big fight in a court about because one of the FBI agents was involved in a murder that one of the like local police caught up on, and they were investigating, and they were trying to bring a case out of it. And basically they said, oh, we're not going to allow you to investigate this murder. A big ass federal court came in and said, it's a matter of national security because the FBI is involved. You're not investigating this murder any longer. And it's like, this is becoming normal. And it's like the reality of the fact that like that could happen now. Like that's the kind of shit we're living in where it's like, oh yeah, national security. Sorry, you can't investigate a murder. Like that's kind of the reality of what we're getting to. And we mostly don't see that kind of stuff because like, we're busy worried about how many masks we should wear. But it's like that stuff is always going on. It's absolutely insane. Like there's absolute tyranny. And it's like, we're just over here looking at like, the other thing that they want us to look at.
So like, how do we stop the tyranny? How do we like actually fight back against it? You ran for president. What would you have actually been able to do running for president when like federal agencies like the FBI, CIA, NSA generally operate autonomously? The courts tend to support whatever the government is doing. We see bad ruling after bad ruling used to justify future bad rulings. Like what can libertarians who do engage in politics? I've run for Congress, I've run for Senate, you ran for president. Like, what are we doing? What's actually the end goal there? Like, how could we actually make a change there?
So I think there's a lot. One is like we have to recognize that all of this feeds off of us. Like we give it that power. We fund it. Like we pay for all this stuff to happen. And so, one thing I advocate for people to do is stop paying taxes or to find a way to stop paying taxes because that cuts them off. Now, of course, everybody says, well, it doesn't matter. Even when you stop paying taxes, they're going to keep printing money. Yeah, but if you stop using their money, they can print as much as they want. It becomes worthless. And like, it's just going to go away. It's like, they're not even going to be able to use it. So
buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. There are things that we can do in that nature. But the other thing too is like, this is one of the things I've been working on, which is like, yeah, let's focus on the elections, but let's not focus as much. Let's focus on shifting the narrative. Let's focus on shifting what people think and what they want, right? Because ultimately, like you look at all these people and they have real problems. Like even the Bernie Sanders socialists, right? They're pointing out real problems. Like, yeah, if you live in a situation where like the only job you can get is minimum wage, you don't have someone to like take care of your kids while you go to school so you can get a better job. That's not the situation you're in. And you still got to pay your rent and like whatever, like you got past debt, all this stuff. There are a lot of people in really bad situations. And then on top of that, you've got the healthcare thing, right? There are a lot of people who are sick and they're worried about like, oh, I got to take care of my grandma. They want $500,000 for her heart medication. Like, all this stuff is going on. These are two very, very serious issues. And what libertarians tend to say is like, well, go get a job like everybody else, right? Or, let the free market do it. And it's like, okay, let's forget about that for a minute. Let's address the fact that these are people who are really pissed off about real issues in their lives. And let's figure out a way to propose to them, hey, we can actually solve those problems. But these politicians, they're giving you like bullshit, right? This Medicare for all, that's never going to work. But let me show you a solution that will work, that will get you affordable healthcare, that will make sure that you can pay your bills, that make sure that you can have a house, you can own a house, right? Stop renting, actually own a house, start saving money so that, when shit happens, when like, you know, another virus comes along and you have to like quit your job for 5 years, whatever. Like you have money saved, you have a safety net of your own, and you're not depending on the government, because how many times has the government come along and said, oh, well, we might not make Social Security this month. And so like when you propose these things, they're like, okay, I'm listening. And, you know, there's like a handful of things that I've proposed already. You know, let's eliminate property tax on the condition that if you own a house and somebody's renting it, you have to pass the savings down to them. So now we're getting rid of property tax and we're reducing the cost of rent. Win-win for both the left and the right, right? So like you come up with all these different things. Then we talk about like smuggling insulin in from Mexico. Why is it that insulin is 88% cheaper in Mexico and Canada than it is in the United States?
Intellectual property laws.
Exactly. Well, and importation laws and like medical, lots of shit, right?
That's actually one of my like bread and butter issues. That's one of my like cream of the crop, like pisses me off issues. And I can't, a lot of libertarians don't recognize the problems like with healthcare in this country. And it always comes to say, oh, the market will provide, the market will provide, the market will provide. I'm like, the market got us where we are because we have a system of government that allows the market to buy government. So until we get rid of the ability for corporations to purchase government legislation, the market will never fucking provide. I work in insurance consulting. I work in plan design. And I work in risk mitigation for insurance companies. And I did a lot of work in the past with Medicare specifically, and specifically helping Medicare beneficiaries try and navigate the problems. And there was a point a few years ago where like I had worked with an insurance company for a low income program to help people who are on Medicare actually afford their insulin, because it was fucking asinine that it cost $640 for a 38-cent vial of insulin. And put together a program where they had a sliding scale. If somebody could prove that they financially could not afford the insurance that covered that insulin, we had a coupon to just give them and they could get the insulin for $5. No problem. And there were so many rules. I ended up getting in a lot of trouble because I got in a fight with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Twitter. And because she was going on about how the pharmaceutical companies are evil and they're the devil and they're trying to charge people all this amount of money, and the insurance companies are just making it worse. I'm like, actually, like a lot of people in the pharmaceutical industry are trying to help. It's just the laws are in place to prevent us from doing this en masse. And she's like, you're lying. I'm like, okay, here's the coupon. And I just published it on Twitter in her replies. And 40,000 people redeemed that coupon in 2 weeks. Nice. But like, it was a lot of her fans who got like, I'm like, here's a coupon from the pharmaceutical company for your free insulin. Like, she's telling you that it costs so much because of like human greed. No, the reason it costs so much is because Medicare negotiated the price. The federal government negotiated the price that all insurance companies have to obligate.
Right, but I don't want to say that's not greed, because that is greed. It's just that it's greed in the government as well. It's not just like greedy corporations. Like that's the thing I point out with the insulin in Mexico and Canada. Like these are the same brands that sell in the US for 100 that sell like for one pen. It's $100 in the US, it's $12 in Mexico and Canada. Same brand. And it's like these corporations are just as greedy in Mexico and Canada as they are in the US. What's the real difference? And it's the government and the laws and you know the bureaucracy and the bullshit and everything. I just found out inhalers are like they're closer to like 95% less. They're like $3 or $5 in Mexico, and they're like $80 in the US, like asthma inhalers.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Even in the U.S., a lot of like these drugs aren't as expensive as you see the list price on. And like one of the things I did when talking to Medicare patients in the past was tell them like what you're seeing, the prices you're seeing, that's what the government negotiated for these prices. But like the cash pay price is actually so much lower if you go in. But guess what? There's a law that prohibits the pharmacist from telling you about the cash pay discount. You have to go in and specifically request it with an RxBIN number. Here's this app you can download that'll give you those numbers. And it's like, oh, the copay for your inhaler is $47. It costs $18 cash.
Wow. That's something I've noticed, and like I had no idea why, but like I have noticed, in the past when I go to a pharmacy, like aside from the ridiculous shit that like they would ask me for a copy of my passport and like my address to make sure I'm not making meth. Like for some reason, giving them my address is gonna make sure I'm not making meth, and like so I give them a fake address anyways because fuck those guys. But I ask questions like that, like how much does this cost if I just wanted to pay cash, and they're just like, well, we can't, like or like how much does such and such cost? Well, we have to see your insurance first to put it in the system, and it's like I just want to know like what's like if you just take it off the shelf and run the barcode, what does it say? And it's like they won't do that.
Right, and it's the app and the website to tell people all the information is out there for free. And I tell them it's goodrx.com, and they have an app that people can download. It's just a GoodRx app. You type in the prescription you're looking for and your zip code, and it'll bring up all the cash prices at the local pharmacies. And a lot of drugs, it doesn't save you money on. A lot of drugs, insurance will save you money on because the insurance companies are actually saving you money off what the drug company wants to charge to make money for their research and development and distribution. But a lot of the old generic stuff that's been around forever, albuterol, inhalers, insulin, that's been on the market for 100 years, that like there's no reason it costs as much as it does other than the fact that government has restricted its availability. GoodRx can get you like 90% discounts.
Nice. I'm gonna check that out.
And it's still cheaper in Mexico and it's still cheaper in Canada, but like for somebody in Nebraska who can't make that drive, it's a good tool to have.
Back to that question you were asking, like, what can people do? I've been encouraging people to become a drug smuggler. Like, like, I mean, there are like millions of people who come to Mexico every year to vacation. And it's like, ask your friends, like, hey, do you guys need any medication while I'm there? Because a lot of them, you don't like insulin, you don't even need a prescription. Because, somehow the US has convinced us like, well, if we didn't have prescriptions on insulin, kids would be like doping up at school in the bathrooms on insulin, and like that's what they've convinced.
How is that
right?
enjoyable?
Yeah, no, and it's like, well, Mexico doesn't have a requirement, and they don't have an issue with people overdosing on insulin. Like,
so you don't in the United States either. There's a way around that even in the United States. You go to Walmart, you tell them you need insulin for your dog, and they hand it to you over the counter, and it costs about 80% less than human insulin, even though it is literally an identical drug made by the same company.
But that's like horse paste, man.
So actually, to that point, to the ivermectin point and the horse paste point, I think a lot more knowledge about the pharmaceutical industry than most libertarians. And like it blows my mind to see people saying like the horse paste argument. Sure, ivermectin is a drug that's been on the market for decades. There was literally a Nobel Prize won for human use of ivermectin as an antiviral and antiparasitic drug. But
go to the NIH website. They even call it there. They say it's a close contender for like a wonder drug, like among penicillin and like they say it themselves. It's FDA approved for human use.
But the dumbasses who are going to Tractor Supply and buying the horse dewormer ivermectin are actual dumbasses because it is a different formulation and there's a lot of other ingredients in that horse paste. Right. And the dosage is for a 1,200-pound horse, not a 200-pound human being. And like there are some potential negative side effects to taking large amounts of it. It eats away at your stomach lining. And it can cause a lot of digestive issues long term for people who take large amounts of ivermectin. But guess what? Your local Rite Aid and CVS has it in human formulation in a pill.
Right, but they won't give it to you because of the government.
It's
like, is there a way around that?
Yeah, you just get it's not hard to get a prescription. Joe Rogan got a prescription. Alex Jones got a prescription.
Right.
There's plenty of doctors out there that'll write those prescriptions.
I think that's been one of the hard things is like, and I saw this with hydroxychloroquine. Like people, people would get sick with the Rona, and they'd be running around saying like, "Oh, does anybody know any doctors that would give me a prescription for this or that?" Because a lot of them won't, because they're afraid of what's going to happen.
Yeah, I want to call out one particular doctor here by name, Kyle Varner. Kyle Varner has kind of been leading the charge as libertarians, like lambasting people with like mass craziness and COVID propaganda, and he's gone like full COVID crazy. And he's been leading the charge against ivermectin use and telling people that ivermectin is terrible and that hydroxychloroquine is fucking awful. Nobody should do it. You should take the vaccine, take the vaccine, take the vaccine. I remember his Facebook posts early on in this pandemic where he was bragging about writing himself a prescription for hydroxychloroquine and offering to write prescriptions for hydroxychloroquine for his friends.
Interesting.
Like
I mean, this is another thing too, because like I mean, I have a lot of respect for him, you know, for a lot of other stuff.
I do too. I've known him for years, and he's one of the most dedicated libertarian activists that I've ever known.
Right.
It's just for some reason COVID made him crazy.
What I want to say about that is like to flip on that, like right. something happened, like it's the same thing, right? Like he was just totally like based philosophical, like yeah, this is bullshit. Here's some stuff that works, and something flipped. Something hit him where he flipped and took the total opposite. Right. It's not like he's just like, oh, I'm gonna be a flip flopping liar, right? Like it's that like something emotional got to him, I'm sure, and it's like it could just be the propaganda. Like finally he heard it enough times. Who knows? Maybe he was threatened because he's a doctor and he's got a license to worry about. Who the fuck knows, man? It's like that is a weird flip.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. It's a flip we've seen. Like I did a show with a former Democratic candidate for Congress in Portland, Oregon the other night. And like me and her were talking about like how she's come along, how she's progressed, and how she's just become more anti-authoritarian. And like when I had mentioned that I think COVID is really like heightening the political partisan divide and it's become a weird partisan issue, she was the one who said, I don't think the partisan issue is right left anymore. I think the new partisan line is authoritarian and anti-authoritarian. And that's why you're seeing COVID fall along partisan lines. It's no longer Republican and Democrat. It's authoritarian and anti-authoritarian, and that's what pushed her out of the Democratic Party.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And I mean, it's funny because you look at like most, you know, we used to say like, yeah, both Democrats and Republicans are authoritarian. And if there are enough of them that are becoming anti-authoritarian to the point where like that's the new divide, then it's like, hey, maybe the libertarians are doing a great job.
Well, at the same time, we're seeing the divide in the Libertarian Party.
That's true too.
Like the Libertarian Party and the Liberty Movement is seeing a divide. It's not as pronounced as the rest of the world. It's certainly not a 47 to 53% ratio across the country, but you see a small minority of people within the Liberty Movement and the Libertarian Party who have gone full regime, who have gone for vaccine mandates. And unfortunately, they seem to be the ones with the reach and the profiles and the resumes to back up and the positions of authority within the Liberty Movement, or like Cato. A adjunct scholar from Cato went on the news to talk about how the libertarian position was to mandate vaccination. Reason magazine published an article about how libertarians should support lockdowns. Like, blows my mind because these are the higher profile libertarians that have been giving up on their principles.
They're because I mean, those aren't like those guys weren't really ever on the fence. Those guys were like both usually pretty strong in favor of liberty. I mean, like when the NSA stuff was coming out, you know, the Snowden stuff, like they were all like very, very anti-NSA, pro-liberty. And like now it's like with this, it is totally different. And it's you know, it's an interesting question too, because we're all hypocrites, right? Like a hypothetical question you can ask a libertarian is, okay, let's say there was like a really, really bad virus. And let's say it was like, you know, as bad as things could possibly be, where if you went outside, you know, like if you got it literally within 15 feet of somebody else, you could potentially die. But there is a magic pill you could take that would make you immune forever. Like, you know, and I know it's like totally hypothetical and people hate even talking about hypotheticals. But if that were the hypothetical situation, would it be okay to force somebody to take a medication? Because basically this person could walk within 15 feet of you and kill you. They're basically a walking weapon. And at what point do you say like, hey, this guy doesn't want to take the medication? And it's like, yeah, you could like, I think there is a breaking point where like you could set up the situation where like no reasonable person was like, yeah, okay. Yeah, that guy getting within 15 feet, that's violating the NAP. And like, you know,
see, I refuse to use I refuse to use the argumentation that no reasonable person, because once you've accepted no reasonable person as a valid metric in measuring an argument, you have gone down the route of declaring anyone who disagrees with you unreasonable. And that's just a quick path to dehumanization. Like, we see Joe Biden in a speech yesterday openly dehumanizing 47% of the country. He's openly comparing that he believes, and his establishment believes, that those who are against vaccine mandates are a virus themselves. He called them the pandemic of the unvaccinated. Like, I'm sorry, but libertarians who were pissed off about Holocaust comparisons 6 months ago, it's born fucking out. And to me, the idea of saying that, like, there can be a situation where, like, there's enough of a risk to justify any mandate, I hate to say it, Ron Swanson is a better libertarian than anybody who makes that fucking argument, because the whole point of this country is if you want to eat garbage, balloon up to 600 pounds, and die of a heart attack at 43, you can, and you are free to do so. And to me, that's beautiful. Ron Swanson.
Right. But but the question is, like, you know, at what point does, like, someone else's behavior become a threat to yours?
Well, even in your example, like the pill that makes you magically immune, okay, that means somebody who hasn't taken the pill, who could be a carrier, they are no threat to the people who chose to do it.
Right.
If this vaccine was effective, you wouldn't need to mandate people to get the vaccine. You'd only have to fucking suggest it, because anybody who got it wouldn't be at risk from those who didn't, and anybody who was at risk, it'd be by their own choice of not getting it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I mean, that's kind of a Darwinist argument of, like, yeah, well, if they're too stupid to take the medication, let them die. But I think there's also, like, you know, it comes into, like, okay, so if somebody's going to come within 15 feet of you and potentially kill you because you don't want to take the magic pill, like, at what point do you get to say, well, he almost came within 15 feet, I get to shoot him?
I don't know. We'd have to ask Chris Cantwell when he gets out of prison.
So I think that there's, like, you know, there are, like, some...
Is social distancing the new paperclip? So Chris Cantwell, that when Chris Cantwell started to go on his radical agenda and radical downfall, what started it when everyone first, like, started to think he was crazy was he went on his show and he made an argument that if somebody took his paperclip, he could kill them.
Oh, wow! I mean,
because it was theft.
I think in Texas, if that happens after sundown, you can.
Only after sundown? No, Texas is always crazy. Let's talk about that. What are your plans in the future? Like, are you going to run for something in Texas again?
Yeah. So, well, I'm running for governor now. But it has become, like, more about, like, pushing these issues, like, about fixing the healthcare system and these other things, because I think that's where we get more attention. And these things are like one of the problems I see with the Libertarian Party is, like, we're like, hey, let's get more membership, right? And it's like people come along and they're like, yeah, I want to legalize weed, and they're like, yeah, we do too. You should join. You should come hang out at a convention. And it's like they get bored to death and they never come back. And then they're like, you know, oh yeah, I want to legalize weed, and they're like, whoa, what? You guys like guns too? Get out of here. You know, so, like, we're trying to push the whole platform down their throat and never even, like, opening up to, like, you know, why we want to legalize weed, because we see it as a human right. It's your pursuit of happiness. You should be able to smoke weed if you want. Instead of, like, yeah, man, like, yeah, I just want to get high. That's cool. Like, or it's medicinal. It's good for health, or we could raise so much money for the schools. Like, those are, like, bullshit reasons when it's a human right. And, like, that's what we should be teaching. And, like, so there's all these other cannabis organizations out there that is, you know, using the bad arguments. And, like, so I'm creating one that says, like, no, it's a human right. And that's what we're pushing. And so in doing so, we get people on issues that they already care about, right? They want to legalize weed, especially in Texas. But then we teach them, like, a libertarian reason why instead of an authoritarian reason why. And so now, like, the hope is that, you know, we're not going to try to shove the whole platform down their throat, but they're going to stick with that. They're going to learn it. And as they start taking on that one little piece of, like, philosophy, they might start applying it to the rest of their life. And then they might start adopting some of the other policies. And we can have some of those conversations, but we're not going to force the whole platform down their throat and say, well, if you want to hang out with us and legalize weed, you're going to have to, like, believe in all this other stuff too. Like, that's not there. So I really think that's the way forward. And this is we're building the big experiment right now to see how well it works. But hopefully it takes off. And like I said earlier, let's decentralize. Let's try different things and see what works. Maybe I'll get the support of a lot of people from other parts of the liberty movement to try to help support this and make this grow across the country.
So you're running for governor in Texas, so you're not going to be able to avoid this. And this is one of the things that I've had a big problem with the Libertarian Party nationally in the past year and a half. And I think most of the Mises caucus and a lot of other membership has had a problem with the Libertarian Party in the past year and a half, is that since COVID started, the Libertarian Party hasn't said shit about COVID until very recently. If you want to be heard, you have to make sure you're talking about things that are relevant and things people care about. So to your point of finding marijuana activists and talking to them about marijuana and the principles behind it and having the full conversation, you also have to make sure you have a presence on the issues that are in the news cycle, because that's what the larger population is going to be looking at. And unfortunately, an issue that libertarians writ large have done their goddamn best to avoid ever talking about is now the number one issue in Texas. What are your positions and opinions on the new abortion laws in Texas?
So this is, a lot of this is whenever I was running for president, I was people would always just come whoa, what's your we'd be talking about anything. And they're so what's your opinion on abortion? And so this is the other thing. When people ask that question, what they're trying to do is put you in a box. Do I love you or do I hate you? Right? Are you pro-life or pro-choice? And they would press that. Oh, well, so are you pro-life or pro-choice? And I would always say neither. Because it's a false dichotomy. It's trying to divide us instead of saying, okay, let's actually sit down and have a conversation about this, right? The ultimate goal for most people, I think, is murder is wrong, and let's reduce the number of abortions, but at the same time, let's not control people's lives and tell them what to do. So what is actually going on here? What is abortion, right? Is it murder? Well, the pro-choice people say it's not murder. So if you ask them, is murder wrong? They'll usually say, yeah, murder's wrong, but they don't see this as murder. Okay, okay, let's understand that that's really where a lot of this conversation is happening. Right. Is that murder? Is it not? Now, this is where that gets interesting, because if you kill a 40-year-old person or a 50-year-old person or a 60-year-old person, there's no special law for that, right? It's just murder, right? And in fact, if you were to get rid of all the laws on murder, a prosecutor would say, this person killed that person intentionally on purpose. They'd put it in front of a jury, and they'd use common law to say what this person did was murder, and the jury would decide whether or not this person should be punished for his crime, whether he's going to be hung or whether he's going to be thrown in a cage. That's up to the jury. Now, if you were to do that same thing and say this person murdered a baby, and you try to make your argument in front of a jury, you're going to see that jury divided in half, because half of them are pro-choice, half of them are pro-life. And so what's actually going to happen there? Because ultimately, if we want to say, okay, look, government we shouldn't have politicians making these decisions. We shouldn't have XYZ making these decisions. It's murder. So then what that means really is if that is murder, half of the population doesn't think it's murder. And if it isn't murder, half the population thinks it is murder. So don't we have a problem with our society where we're completely divided on being able to figure out whether or not something is murder? And maybe we should have that conversation and figure that out, instead of just trying to say, well, I'm on this side and that's going to be the law, and anybody who opposes me is, we're going to shoot at you, we're going to steal your money, we're going to throw you in a cage, which is the government solution. That's the only thing they know how to do. Because they can't actually, they can make it illegal, but they can't actually stop it. They can take your money.
Texas went a step further. Texas not only made it illegal, Texas put a bounty on anybody to report it. The
IRS does that too. It's every once in a while you see that, what is it? The Crime Stoppers hotline. There's, I guess they're probably not doing bounties, but I
think it's a $10,000 bounty if you report a doctor performing abortions.
Yeah, and where are they getting the money? They're stealing it from somebody else, right? What are they going to do with the doctor when they find him? They're going to throw him in a cage. But here's the other thing too, and I get it. Texas is huge, and it takes forever to drive across it. But you can drive outside of Texas and get your abortion in Oklahoma or Mexico or like wherever you want to do it and come back to Texas. And it's like, hey, like nobody's going to jail. So what did you really prevent? What did you really stop? You didn't stop abortions. You didn't reduce the number. Maybe you reduced the number a little bit because like.
So I look at it as like myself personally, I do hold more of a pro-life philosophy where I very much want to reduce the number of abortions, and I think that an abortion is a tragic scenario to happen, but I recognize that it is largely a choice that nobody else should have the ability to stop with the force of law, like because like putting someone in a cage isn't going to stop new abortions, or like punishing a woman for having an abortion isn't going to do justice for any injustice that might have been done. Ultimately, it's the problem of prohibition. You're not going to stop abortions. You're just going to make them less safe and harder to get. And to me, I want to reduce the number of abortions, but at the same time, in order to reduce them, I think we need to make the ones that are happening as safe and as readily accessible as possible. And so removing the restrictions on abortion and taking the pro-choice stance there makes the most sense if we can do something like reform the adoption system, make it easier to adopt, make it less financially harmful for someone to have a child, increase the ability for young couples to be able to live off a single income so somebody can stay home and not have to incur child expenses. Like there's a lot of things that are wrong with our culture and our country today, especially economically, that I think are leading to the increase in the number of abortions, because young women are getting pregnant, evaluating their economic situation with their family and saying, I just can't do it. Yeah. But I was forced to take an abortion position. I wasn't forced. When I ran for Congress in 2018, I thought it'd be an opportunity to make the reforming the adoption system approach because I was running against an adoption attorney. And I like to point out, like, the fact that you have a job is why we have abortions. Like if there wasn't an attorney required to adopt, if a middle-class couple that wanted to adopt but couldn't have kids of their own were able to simply go and adopt a child, maybe these young expecting mothers who are terrified of their economic prospects and their ability to take care of that child wouldn't feel pressured to have an abortion if there was an alternative where they could give birth to the child and somebody else could raise the child lovingly.
Yeah. It's there's definitely a lot of that pressure. I mean, like, fundamentally, we could talk about how, you know, society alone says like, oh, you have to, like, if like you are an absolute failure if you don't have some sort of like job and house and shelter and like all this other stuff. When you know, this is like what they have drawn as the poverty line, right? And like to be poor is shameful, right? These are kind of the things, and it's like I've met people who are like poor. They don't have a lot, but they're happy because like their goal in life is not to like have the house and the family and the kids and like all this other stuff. And what I think is interesting is like, you don't, like in Mexico, you don't see people saying like, oh, I'm too poor to have kids. Right? Like that's not a thing. And you know, another big difference between the poor in the United States versus the poor in Mexico, the poor in the United States have a lot more, but their net worth is a lot less because they have all this extra debt. So their net worth is actually negative if you consider the debt.
Yep.
Versus Mexico, you don't have a lot of debt, you just don't have a lot of stuff. And it's like that like constant fear of like, oh my God, I got to pay this credit card bill every month. And on top of that, I have to pay for this really expensive kid. And then on top of that, I have to use like government regulated, you know, whatever, like we don't have reusable diapers in the US anymore, right? Like it's all
they're making a comeback.
Really? All right.
The thrifty hipster generation, my generation, is bringing a comeback to the poverty lifestyle.
Nice.
As most exemplified as we were the generation that grew up with Chris Farley telling us that we were going to be failures if we lived in a van down by the river, and everyone's dream is to own a fucking van that they can drive down to the river and like live it. Hashtag van life is a thing now.
Exactly. And but I mean, like, that's like why was that like shamified? Like that like basically I think is like, you know, I don't want to say that's a reason why we have abortions, but like I think that's like that is a big pressure that's put on society for like all these things. There's like a long time ago, I was like reading about how like the average age of a farmer in the United States is like 50 years old. And this was like 10 years ago. And they say it increases every year because like nobody, like no kids are like, yeah, when I grow up, I want to be a farmer. No, it's like, oh, I need to move to the city and have a big fancy job and like all this and that. And so like people are trying to do that. And so of course you have like nobody can get a job because none of those jobs are available because everybody's trying to get them. Meanwhile, like we have to outsource our farming to other countries because nobody wants to farm because that's a job that's frowned upon. Oh, you're simple if you're a farmer. Oh, you're stupid. You never went to college and you couldn't get like a regular office. And it's like, that's just total fucking bullshit. Because at the end of the day, if you got enough money, like why would you want to work at all? Fucking retire young, do a little bit of farming, grow your own food. And like that, like you get to a point where you're like, hey, that's actually not a bad idea. I'm poor. Like, okay, I got internet, Netflix, and and I don't need like a whole lot of material shit. And it's like, bring that back. But like you said, there is like that culture is starting to grow, but like that has a lot to do with like a lot of the influences of how, I guess how we kind of build our society and how we identify ourselves and the pressures that are put on everybody.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with just the growth of the difference in size in time between generations, like my generation versus our parents. My parents' generation bred way beyond replacement. They had a lot of goddamn kids, but they also passed a whole bunch of zoning laws and restrictive laws to protect their property values. So now there's nowhere for their kids to live. I think it comes up every few months where a post will circulate on social media about how like millennials are the first generation in recorded history to be worse off than their parents economically. But we still, even then, even though we're the first generation to be worse off than our parents economically, we live in a society where absolute decadence is so normalized that we use the word vanilla to describe plain. Whereas like historically vanilla is the most expensive spice on the planet and like the most difficult to attain spice on the planet. And it used to cost an absolute fortune. Like kings would send expeditions to the mountains to get ice and spend mountains of gold on vanilla to have this decadence called ice cream that we get at 7-Eleven for $1. It's just mind blowing that like we do live in a time and where the poorest among us is still amongst the best off 1% of humans in history. Yeah. So that's an interesting philosophical note to leave on, but we are at our hour. This has been a great conversation, great spanning conversation. Let people know where they can follow you and follow up and learn more about your campaign for governor.
Yeah. So head over to danforfreedom.com. I have links to all my social media pages over there. I haven't been spending a whole lot of time on Facebook. Much like the other social platforms, they suck, but Facebook sucks the worst. I've been spending more time on Twitter lately. And then also check out taxationstuff.info. There's a lot of information there. One of the things I like to do is inform people about how they don't have to pay the income tax. There's actually ways to get out of doing that. That's kind of a really fun hobby if you're interested in not paying taxes. So that's pretty much All
right. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on. Until next time, be free, everybody. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to catch more, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications for future episodes. You can follow me directly on Twitter at O'Donnell, 4NH, to keep up to date with what I'm working on. And if you want to be among the first to support this channel, check out our Patreon link in the description. And as always, don't forget to head on over to sneckswag.com to get your freshest Liberty swag today. Until next time, be free, everybody.